The year is 1919. The First World War has just ended, and India, a vast colony under British rule, stands at a crossroads. The desire for self-governance is growing stronger among Indians. In this charged atmosphere, the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms come into being. These reforms were the brainchild of Edwin Montagu and Lord Chelmsford. They aim to increase Indian participation in governance. The result was a landmark piece of legislation. The Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms aimed to introduce self-government in India. This was a significant departure from complete British control. The reforms responded to demands for political autonomy. They sought to transition India toward responsible government. The 1919 Act laid the foundation for India's independence. The Government of India Act of 1919 brought about significant changes in the structure of governance, both at the central level in Delhi and in the provinces across the country. It introduced a system of diarchy in the provinces, a concept that divided administrative subjects into two lists, reserved and transferred. Reserved subjects like finance and law and order remained under the control of the British administration, headed by the governor. Transferred subjects such as education, local self-government and public health were given to Indian ministers who were answerable to the elected provincial legislatures. At the centre, the Act introduced a bicameral legislature for the first time. This meant that the existing Imperial Legislative Council was expanded and divided into two houses. The lower house, called the Legislative Assembly, and the upper house, called the Council of State. While the reforms aimed to increase Indian participation in governance, the British still retained significant control. The Governor-General, appointed by the British Crown, remained the head of the central government and held vast powers, including the ability to veto legislation and issue ordinances. The 1919 Act introduced diarchy in the provinces. It was a dual system dividing responsibility between elected Indian representatives and appointed British officials. Reserved subjects were controlled by the governor and his council, while transferred subjects were managed by Indian ministers. This system faced challenges and led to friction between elected ministers and appointed officials. The Act also introduced a bicameral legislature with the Legislative Assembly and the Council of State. The Assembly had more elected members and budgetary powers, while the Council acted as a revising chamber. Despite these changes, true legislative autonomy for Indians remained limited. While the Government of India Act of 1919 introduced some elements of self-governance, it's crucial to understand the limitations of these reforms. The Governor-General, as the representative of the British Crown, continued to hold immense power and authority. He had the power to veto any legislation passed by the central legislature, effectively giving him the final say in all matters of governance. This meant that even if the elected Indian representatives in the legislature were in agreement on a particular issue, the Governor-General could overrule their decision if he deemed it necessary. Furthermore, the central legislature itself had limited powers. While it could debate and pass laws, its control over the budget was restricted. The majority of the budget, particularly the funds allocated to defense and administration, remained outside the purview of the legislature. This lack of financial control severely hampered the ability of Indian representatives to influence policy decisions. The Governor-General and his Executive Council retained control over key areas like finance, defense and foreign affairs, effectively limiting the scope of self-governance granted by the Act. Despite its shortcomings, the Government of India Act of 1919 holds a significant place in India's freedom struggle. It acknowledged, for the first time, the principle of responsible government and the need for greater Indian participation in their own governance. This was a crucial concession from the British, albeit a limited one, and it fueled the aspirations of the Indian nationalist movement. The Act provided a platform for Indian leaders to engage in the political process, voice their demands, and gain valuable experience in legislative procedures. This experience would prove invaluable in the years to come as India moved closer to independence. Moreover, the 1919 Act served as a catalyst for further political reforms. It sparked intense debate and discussion about the future of India's governance, both within India and in Britain. This ongoing dialogue, fueled by the aspirations of the Indian people, ultimately paved the way for subsequent reforms and eventually India's independence. The Act's significance lies not only in its content, but also in its symbolism. It represented a crack in the edifice of British rule, a recognition that the old order was changing. This realization, coupled with the growing strength of the nationalist movement, set the stage for the final struggle for freedom. While the Government of India Act of 1919 marked a step towards self-governance, it was widely criticized for its limitations and shortcomings. Indian nationalists argued that the reforms were too limited and did not go far enough in granting Indians control over their own affairs. The system of diarchy was particularly unpopular. Critics pointed out that the division of subjects was arbitrary and designed to keep real power in the hands of the British administration. The elected Indian ministers were often left frustrated, their authority undermined by the lack of control over key areas of governance. The limited powers of the central legislature and the overriding authority of the Governor-General also drew sharp criticism. The Act was seen as a half-hearted attempt at reform, a way for the British to appease the Indians without relinquishing any real power. Furthermore, the Act failed to address several key demands of the nationalist movement, including the demand for complete self-rule and the end of British control over the army and foreign policy. This led to a growing sense of disillusionment and anger among the Indian populace. The Government of India Act of 1919 was met with mixed reactions in India. While some welcomed it as a step in the right direction, many others, particularly within the growing nationalist movement, saw it as too little, too late. The Act's passage coincided with the Jallianwala Bagh massacre in Amritsar, a horrific event that further inflamed public opinion and galvanized the nationalist movement. The massacre, in which British troops opened fire on a peaceful gathering of unarmed civilians, exposed the brutal reality of British rule and fueled the fire of resistance. Despite the limitations of the 1919 Act, it played a pivotal role in shaping the future of India's political landscape. It provided a platform for Indian leaders to engage in the political process, hone their skills, and build a broader base for the nationalist movement. The Act also highlighted the inadequacies of British rule and the growing chasm between the rulers and the ruled. This realization, coupled with the unifying force of the nationalist movement, set the stage for the final push towards independence. The Government of India Act of 1919, though flawed, was a turning point in India's history. It marked the beginning of the end of colonial rule and paved the way for India's eventual emergence as a free and independent nation.